Thanks so much. This is funny, right? But it's great fun. Thank you so much, and thank you for the courage that you have, and for all the teachers. I mean, I was floored by the gathering last year. Let's move on. Let's move on to this, right? So, what are we looking at now? In the next hour, you will hear from 6 different speakers. And why is this important? Because in the time of pandemic, the changes that have happened have actually marginalized the weakest of our societies. And I think you will hear from speakers who will tell you what it's like. We'll have, and I'll go bottom up and I'll end with our keynote speaker, right? For attacks on trade union and human rights in Fiji, you're going to hear from Rosalia Fatiaki. You are also going to hear about trade union and human rights, these attacks that we're living through in the Philippines, from Melania Flores Lagahit. The attack on freedom of expression in India, that's going to be Prabhu Mohapatra. Attack on freedom of expression in Hong Kong, right? Both of our countries came with very draconian laws at about the same time. Sorry, not country. Let me rephrase. From Hong Kong, you're going to hear from Andrew Shum. And then we'll before we go to those specific countries, we'll talk about a regional overview that you will hear from Shoya Yoshida. And then finally, we come to our keynote address. The world is millions of jobs have been lost. Collective bargaining agreements have been pushed out. Those who are poor and the migrant workers, for example, are lost in the liminal space. Simrin Singh, she is somebody who has been with ILO, she's the ILO country office head, the director for Sri Lanka and Maldives. She's been with ILO since 2000. She held various positions in different offices, as well as at the ILO headquarters in Geneva. She was a senior specialist on fundamental principles and rights at work based at the ILO regional office for Asia Pacific. In this keynote, she'll be looking at the people who bear the brunt. When everything flows downhill, who are the weakest? Who will bear the brunt of the cascade of things that are going on? Supporting workers and children during the pandemic, our keynote address, Ms. Simrin Singh.
Hi, Maria, and thank you so much for having me join this. I have a long association with EI, and especially in the Asia Pacific region, so I really appreciate reaching out to me to be part of this very important discussion on World Teachers' Day. Indeed, as you framed it, the situation is rather dire, especially for those that are the most affected, those in the informal sector of many of the countries in our region. We have large informal sectors where we find the most vulnerable exploited workers, and they have been thrown over the edge either because of wage losses, unemployment, livelihood losses, fears of health and safety. And the children and also teachers have been really at the front and center stage, along with healthcare workers, frankly, with this pandemic. So let me just walk through and talk a little bit about 2 segments, those children that are affected and what could be the implications on their rights, as well as teachers and what this has meant, especially for teachers as workers going forward in the context of this unknown pandemic that keeps shifting itself and calls for a huge amount of agility that none of us necessarily always have in store to manage. So pre-COVID, let's put it this way, pre-COVID, if you look at one of the most exploited forms of child rights abuse was child labor. Pre-COVID, we were seeing such amazing, over the past 20 years, progress in terms of a decline in child labor. We were down to 152 million boys and girls in child labor. And by a large measure, this decline was because education was being provided. So they were in schools longer, schools were becoming more accessible. So we were seeing a continuous steady decline in child labor. But what we are quite concerned about as ILO at this point, as well as all of our partners, is that because of all of these multiple areas that have come out, these vulnerabilities, especially of parents, those already already in poverty, those that have lost their livelihoods, those that do not have social protection because the states didn't have good social protection systems, those that were migrant workers that are no longer able to send remittances back or have come back and can't find work in their countries of origin. All of those factors have really a potential, because these were all of the markers that led to child labor and child rights abuses before COVID anyway. So we see this sort of amplified, and it's really important to be cognizant of all of these multiple vulnerabilities. One of the other features we see, especially here in Asia, is also this issue of debt. A lot of these families, people that have lost jobs, work in perhaps micro, small enterprises that are, of 10 employees or less, or home-based workers that had their children. They were already there, but they had borrowed, they were already in debt prior to COVID. And now with the loss of jobs and income, disruptions in supply chains for their products or what they were selling, consumers not having enough money to spend to be able to purchase those products, they find themselves in even greater debt. And one thing we've noticed with COVID is that several governments have actually put forward financial stimulus packages to help those in the informal sector, those that have been really affected. But you also find on the other side of it that even though these packages exist, they don't always reach the most vulnerable. And the way it's channeled is that since these people do not have, these families don't have collateral to begin with, they cannot always access these packages. So some of the things that actually could work would be to find a way to reduce the need for collateral and instead subsidize. And here I'm talking again about education. I think education was not always free and accessible to all before COVID. Now it's become even harder. Many of the schools and education has had to go virtual, and that brings with it another burden because not everyone has that connectivity, much less teachers might not even have the training to be able to go, if not the equipment or the IT infrastructure to be able to deliver it virtually. So you already have even less access to education, and then you don't have the income necessarily to be able to pay for the education because it's not always free. But if member states, and this is something that I think the teachers' unions and all can really also push for, is can they also look at ways in which to subsidize the indirect costs of education, such as uniforms or whatever else might be the case. And also one other key factor is many children relied on food and the school meals program, so that maybe their one meal or one main meal of the day would be channeled through the school environment. Now you see that that's been disrupted, so it would be really important to also lobby that their nutrition and food needs are met, even if they're doing it from home. One other danger that I wanted to point out is with the whole shift to virtual in many instances, you also have a risk of other forms of child exploitation rising up, such as online exploitation. And that is something that we have started to observe here in this country, but I've also been hearing in others that because of more time online, the risk factors and exposure to online exploitation of children has risen. One other aspect is the safety and health aspect. This is a health pandemic, and this is unlike any other. It's not a war and other kinds of disasters we've dealt with. And so the safety and health and the psychosocial well-being side of things is also something to really consider, both of teachers that are supposed to provide and be looked upon, to provide that safety and security to the children, but also of the children, and not to mention the parents that might feel quite fearful of schools being, places where you might get the pandemic, where it could be spread. So apart from them being closed for extended periods, the whole point of them even reopening is something that creates a lot of psychosocial tension as well. And not everyone has been trained, including teachers, on how to handle the psychosocial dimension of that health fear of yourself being a carrier of the disease, as well as others perhaps having it. I'm happy I see schools have reopened here wearing masks all the time, but it's not the case in many other countries and places, and you do get sloppy over time, so that is something to look at. Another thing to look out for also is the whole legal and law enforcement side of things, especially on the labor side. Because of the pandemic, labor inspectors cannot go out and carry out routine inspections for seeing exploitation, whether it's of the family members, the adults, or even children. And I think this is an area that we need to really ramp up and find solutions for them to be able to do it using technology or other means when they can't themselves go out and physically inspect. There should not be a case that because of the pandemic, there's a sense that, oh, well, laws don't matter and legal enforcement doesn't matter. And also, implementing measures to safeguard as well as to punish those that perpetrate these crimes are not being followed with the same level of robustness as it was pre-COVID. So we recognize it's a very difficult time, but we do see that there is a lot of need for us to come together in an integrated approach to look at both teachers as well as students, their well-being, and to look at it also from a family perspective, knowing that we have considerable issues with regard to poverty, debt, the loss of livelihoods, health concerns, and as well as actual health problems related to COVID, the lack of social protection, including for teachers, frankly, and also for for family members that were already vulnerable, aren't able to do, and the fact that migration continues and will continue for the future also, as we can see, to be something that one cannot rely as much on in terms of remittances coming forward. So given all of that, I see a real important role that teachers' unions can play, actors in the education field can play, because education will still remain one of the key solutions going forward, and teachers will be some of the key frontline workers, apart from health workers, that are going to see to it that children's rights are not exploited, that they do get their access to education, and that their well-being is taken care of. I'm going to end there and really, again, thank you for having this very important discussion at this time. It's still very unknown, and we don't know how it's going to pan out, but we do know if we stick to these common principles of recognizing where the fragilities are and who are there for the solutions going forward, such as teachers and looking at it from the family perspective and the community perspective, I think we can ride the storm as best as we can, given all of this unknown. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Simran. These are huge and great insights, the problem that we're all having to deal with. Let me introduce our next speaker. Shoya Yoshida is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation of Asia Pacific. This group represents over 60 million members in 34 countries and territories in Asia Pacific. It strives for economic, social, and political justice, essentially decent work through trade union actions. And in what he'll say next, Shoya is going to give us an overview of the workers' rights situation
Okay,
in the
thank you
Asia
very much,
Pacific region.
Maria and EI, for this opportunity. I'd like to discuss today the role of teachers to teach to students, but not arithmetic, history, PE, music, but universality. Universality means the quality of being applicable to all people, irrespective of time and space. It is a very abstract word, but can help us think about the world in coming decades. Democracy is one of universal values, together with human rights, the rule of law, and many others, but also a process for the people with different backgrounds to agree on common values. It is established in modern Western society and are still new to our region, the region of Asia and the Pacific, but it is widely upheld and is cited, for example, in the SDGs as a key element of our future the world should build for itself. So to be responsible member of the community, students need to learn the universal values. However, 2 decades into the 21st century, the global trend toward embracing the universality appears to be losing momentum. Democracy means being in touch and in tune with life as it is lived in our community, and it requires that we get inside the reality of people who are different from us so that we can understand their point of view. Democracy needs time and is sometimes tiresome. Most leaders, just like us, prefer to surround themselves with opinions that validate what they already believe. They divide people into friends and enemies and try to increase the support from friends by attacking the enemy with discriminatory words. You lost your job because of someone coming outside the countries like this. What is surprising to me is that many of young people prefer simplistic, macho leaders to democratic ones. Leaders are afraid that democracy works, and teachers, at least according to my personal experience, are liberal. I use the word liberal to refer to the attitude of placing high value on freedom, human rights, tolerance, and diversity. That's why undemocratic leaders and their government keep making harder for trade unions to stand up for teachers in the Philippines, Cambodia, Korea, Japan, and many others. Also, this is the global trend that the public spending for education has been decreasing under the pretext of fiscal consolidation. But quality of education fully depends on working conditions of teachers. The balance between the teachers' working condition and the fiscal conditions of the country could be best achieved only through autonomous industrial relations and collective bargaining. Therefore, this is my conclusion. We must work harder to create stable political climate for teachers and their unions to operate without fear of reprisal. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll come back with questions after we hear all of our speakers. Now let's go to Hong Kong. Andrew is the chief executive of the Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union. That represents over 100,000 teachers and education practitioners in Hong Kong, from kindergarten to universities. Andrew is going to speak on what's happening in Hong Kong, a focus on freedom of expression from the teachers union perspective. Andrew?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to share our views on the situation in Hong Kong on this particular day, the World Teachers' Day. The pandemic has been causing a huge effect all over the world, including Hong Kong. Everything has been changed since the outbreak of the disease. Some people said the pandemic marked a watershed in human history, but for Hong Kong people, we marked another watershed 1 year earlier. Before being affected by the pandemic, we have experienced the biggest protest and social unrest since the handover in 1997. To fight for freedom and democracy, many Hong Kong people, especially the youth, actively participate in the social movement. After a year, around 9,000 people have been arrested, of whom 40% are students. It was an unprecedented challenge to our teachers in dealing with students whose emotions were highly affected by the development of the social movement and political atmosphere. Another source of pressure on teachers is the tense political atmosphere. Since the beginning of the anti-extradition bill movement, the education sector has been under immense political pressure as the government and its supporters accuse the teachers of inciting students to join the protest, which of course is not factually correct. They also attribute the political turmoil to failure of the education system. Echoing the accusation by the government, pro-government supporters have launched a campaign against teachers who shared their political views on the social media or participate in the social movement. They doxed the teachers, putting their personal information on the social media and mobilizing other supporters to file campaigns against them. Many of the teachers were only sharing their views or feelings about social affairs on their personal social media platforms and had not participated in any illegal activities. However, the Education Bureau has been handling the cases proactively and has issued reprimand letters or warning letters to a number of teachers, even without enough evidence. Moreover, the Education Bureau has threatened that they are considering canceling teachers' registration in some cases. Until now, the Education Bureau has received at least 222 cases, of which 63 have been found to be unsubstantiated. During the pandemic, online teaching has become a new normal. Although it is a new way of teaching and learning during the pandemic, it has brought about a new challenge to teachers under the intense political tension in Hong Kong. Contrary to traditional classes, online teaching can be viewed or recorded by other people, such as parents or other family members of students, which means that the process of teaching could become under the scrutiny of the public. It makes teachers worried that they may face complaints or even become a target of pro-government supporters should they make any mistake or any politically incorrect comments during lessons. The pandemic has changed a lot of things all over the world. Like other cities, the Hong Kong government has imposed social distancing rules to prohibit group gathering. Although we understand it is necessary for combating the disease, it has become a tool deployed by the police to oppress political assembly. For example, the police have rejected all applications for protest assemblies for the reason of avoiding group gatherings and prosecuted peaceful protesters under the control of disease regulation, while people are allowed to crowd narrow streets and shopping malls as usual. More importantly, the government proposed the Legislative Council election by 1 year on public health grounds, followed by the enactment of national security law. Many Hong Kong people are worried that we will no longer enjoy human rights and freedoms as before. Under the political atmosphere and chilling effect, teachers have become more cautious while teaching or discussing any topic using their social media and participating in any public event. Also to the Hong Kong PTU, both the political atmosphere and the pandemic have brought an unprecedented challenge too. But as a teachers union, we will face it with our members. We have been following up a number of cases about teachers being complained, providing legal and financial support to them. It is a difficult moment for Hong Kong education sector, but we will strike against political interference and defend our professionalism. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Andrew. I mean, we are watching very closely what is going on in Hong Kong now. Thank you for your summary, and we'll come back with questions. We'll move to our next speaker now, and we'll go directly to Fiji first. After Hong Kong, let's talk to Rosalia. She is the newly elected General Secretary of the Association of University of South Pacific, staff based in Fiji. She'll speak on the trade union and human rights situation in Fiji with a focus on how the pandemic has led to increased violations of the workers' and teachers' rights and gendered impact of the pandemic. Rosalia?
Bulavinaka, namaste, and Waya Mori. Greetings from Fiji. No doubt that this pandemic has brought about chaos to the norm of doing business across the globe, and we in Fiji are not saved from this dilemma. The COVID-19 pandemic hit Fiji in March of this year, and this has led to border closures and curfews and other restrictions imposed across the country. Schools were closed for 3 months, in which students were given worksheets to work from home. Now, this is easier said, that the students have work to do at home. But this poses many challenges, as here in Fiji, much of the population do not have access to internet connectivity, and the option given to parents to collect the worksheets from the schools were also very challenging, given the fact that many parents have reduced working hours or they have been completely laid off from work. So accessing these supposed worksheets from schools is not that easy, as the government has put it. To counter the drastic impact of having children to stay home during the lockdowns, the Ministry of Education quickly announced new methods of delivery. There was an online platform where parents can download those worksheets. But mind you, as I said earlier, connectivity is an issue. Parents have very limited access to getting to the schools due to financial constraints, as I said earlier. And even if the students have access to these worksheets, this does not rule out that constructive learning is taking place. How are the students expected to understand by reading the worksheets, and what are they supposed to do? The drastic concern raised were the capabilities around teaching the children the content in order for the children to solve these problems that is there in the worksheets. Some teachers went the extra mile to prepare videos and send it to their students to explain the learning materials. But again, accessibility is in question. Internet connectivity in Fiji is expensive, and it is also not available to the general population. Many parents have raised concerns over social media regarding the children's learning. And as parents, they do not have the expertise to teach the specific subjects. Maybe it be basic science, how to do those experiments, whether it be accounting. Can you imagine how difficult it is to have these parents trying to juggle how is this supposed to be? Children's education are therefore in jeopardy. The panic mode led to many decisions that are not thought through. During panic modes, it is critical that all stakeholders are party to decision making, and consulting the teacher unions would surely result in amicable solutions to deliver the best in education of our children in this stressful environment. These challenges pose a big threat to education in Fiji, in the Pacific, everywhere else that's hit by this disaster. Tertiary education is also not spared from the challenges imposed by this global crisis. Many of the tertiary students in Fiji, they come from outside of the parameters of where the institution is situated, and they were forced to be repatriated home. And this has led to students dropping out of the courses in semester 1. The university teaching staff went to all levels to provide support remotely through online learning platforms. However, the social and economic impacts are far greater and drastic, and this led to those not having the social and economic support to withdraw from the studies. The traumatic impact of the COVID-19 in education is worrying, as teachers are forced to cover their lessons in so little time, and the students on the receiving end would be deeply loaded and leads to information overload. The limited resources are an added stress to both teachers and students. In these most critical times, trade unions are challenged with disruptions to normal business of teaching and learning. How do we continue to support our staff? Should be imposed structures take place, the support that institutions provide for those students who are forced to learn remotely, the logistical support regarding modification to coursework, exams, and maintaining at the same time maintaining the learning outcomes, all these are in question. In fact, the shift from face-to-face delivery to distance teaching did come with challenges, and not only limited to accessibility to technical infrastructure, but competencies and pedagogies to deliver in this mode of learning, and that is remote learning. The trade unions must be brought to the table to work solutions in combating this much challenged environment that has caught us in the blue. Limited to no consultation will not help the situation, as education is core to human rights. With reduced budgets, the danger of massive pay cuts for teachers, as well as the continuity of providing free education, would only be a matter of time. Unions have continued to push through with senior management to come to consensus in how we deal with these issues. Reorganizing the institution for streamlined operation will ensure that those in the low end of the salary scales providing services to ensure quality delivery in education is maintained and must be protected. Trade unions must maintain relevance in the whole process, and social dialogue is most critical in these most challenging times. Even when schools have reopened in the country, the emerging economic recession threatens to exacerbate inequalities and could roll back progress made in expanding educational access and improving the quality of learning globally, as humanity looks for ways to transform the world for the better after the worst crisis in this century. We must rethink social policies, including education, address the long-standing issues of structural inequality, poverty, and exclusion. An impending global recession is likely to have drastic consequences for the funding of education and other public services, as well as for individual lives and livelihoods. During this time, global commitments is needed in education, and it must be maintained and resources directed to those who have been hardest hit socially, economically, and educationally. The longer it takes before lockdowns and curfews can be fully lifted, the worse it will get. The contraction of economies is hurting everyone, but those at the bottom of the income pyramid and in the informal sector feel the pinch. Amounts of historic drop in poverty over the past decades, the number of people in extreme poverty is set to rise again, and Fiji is no exception. The most vulnerable pay the biggest price: women, children, the disabled, and the elderly. The threats posed in this COVID-19 environment would force drastic actions on education, including government funding cuts. The unions must continue to push through our governments in social dialogue to address these issues. This means working in solidarity, empathy, and appreciation for our common humanity. All this will likely fuel grievances in the wake of conflict, instability, and displacements, all giving support to extremist groups. If left to fester, the consequences will be neither contained nor time-bound. With that, again, we stand in solidarity to defend education in all levels, whether it be primary, kindergarten, or tertiary. And that's it from Fiji, from the Association of the University of the South Pacific staff. Thank you very much, one and all, for listening to me this afternoon to give you a summary of what the situation is like here in Fiji. Vinaka, thank you.
Pinaka, thank you, Rosalia. Thanks for that. Let's bring back our other panelists. So, unfortunately, I was really looking forward to hearing from India and from the Philippines. We didn't have them in today, but the common themes have been pulled out by both Simrin and Simrin is, yes, she's still here, by Simrin and by Shoya. Andrew actually also brought up a lot of the same things that other countries are dealing with, and Ratalia brings up all of the what teachers are going to have to deal with, what the education sector. So let's go back to Simrin. Simrin, I pulled out three things from what you said, which was that similar to everybody, you're saying that there needs to be subsidy. Education must be subsidized, in addition to finding a new way of doing this. The second, you pointed out that we're going to have to deal with psychosocial tensions that teachers and students are going to have to deal with. And then the third was interesting to me, which leads kind of a little bit to Andrew's rule of law. You said, we cannot discount the laws just because this is a time of pandemic, and that there needs to be an integrated approach because there's going to be increased poverty, increased debt, increased health issues. I mean, in general, right? Increased fear. So let's pull the thread on the last one first. When power gets more power and the ability to hold power to account diminishes, how do we hold power to account so that rule of law continues? And I'm coming to you next, Andrew, after that.
I think we have to capitalize on existing systems that were there before. And again, I think having teachers that were organized and unionized, that are also members of specific communities, they have a critical role to be able to show and expose when rule of law is no longer being adhered to. So I think we have to find ways of connecting. I mean, if there's IT issues of connecting online that we've heard in many cases, there are other ways in which people have been connecting, whether it's through WhatsApp or even a phone, or even shouting across to the neighbor, whatever it might be, congregating in street areas and then having those conversations. I think it's really important that we keep the conversation going and check and work with existing institutions that were there, knowing full well that they're also struggling to do things the way they used to do things. And I think in especially the union movement as well, we've seen quite a few challenges in trying to stay connected, because a lot of the work is done in terms of having dialogue, right, and having these discussions and in person. And many of the members don't always have access to IT and things. So there have been these challenges, but I think if we can still capitalize and pick brains in terms of how we can communicate and expose these things, keep it in the front, on the radar. There's very good also connections with the media. Many organizations have. Why not bring them in? They're looking at the pandemic from multiple dimensions. Having the media also talk about some of these issues where the fear factor, or whether it's a rise of potential online exploitation of children, whatever these other dimensions are that aren't always getting, beyond the numbers of COVID cases and the locations of COVID cases, beyond just the health messaging. They're looking for the human side of things. So I think we need to really capitalize on those dimensions and keep at it and ask those questions. Use social media if need be, as always. It's really been a tool as well to bring up and question when the rule of law is not being adhered to. A very clear message needs to go out that we as citizens, because we're already so vulnerable, expect the rule of law to be adhered to at this time. And we're doing our best as citizens, of course, to try to stay safe and not spread the disease and adapt to the extent possible. But we also expect you also as law enforcement agents to be equally responsive in this case.
Thank you. Thanks, Simrin. It's fascinating to me because, again, these collective bargaining agreements are just getting thrown out because there is no money. I'm going to Andrew and then Shoya. I'm coming back to you to something you said about the fiscal, money. But Andrew, let's pick up on rule of law. Well, both Hong Kong and the Philippines have had new laws come up during this time period. And you've already talked a little bit about how teachers have been affected and in some cases even targeted, right? or hopefully not yet targeted, right? What advice do you give, at a time when in some countries, the kinds of pressure which is about what people think about democracy, human rights, do these values, uh, should they take a back seat? What advice are you giving your teachers? I think you're muted. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. I think the national security law has affected a lot of people. The chilling effect has been already here. That's what we are worried about. Um, for the rule of law, to be honest, in the past few years, Hong Kong people worried, and we are debating over whether we still have the rule of law. So, and after the enactment of the national security law, which is implemented directly from Beijing instead of local legislation. Um, Many people think that the rule of law um, is over. Um, that's why we are so pessimistic to the future of Hong Kong. But for teachers, I think we can only stick with our professionalism to do what we can do in school or as a citizen outside the school. We still, as Hong Kong people, still treasure democracy, freedoms, and human rights so much. But now it is a very difficult moment for us to voice out because even the peaceful protest assemblies is not allowed under the pandemic or some other reasons from the government.
Yeah, no, we hope, we wish you luck. It's a tougher environment for sure from what we're seeing.
Yeah,
Shoya, you went through kind of what Asia Pacific is going through, and you pointed out what everyone has said in different ways, which is more money should go towards education. But and I mean, are the SDGs even attainable given where the world is? And what advice do you give trade unions, education secretaries? I mean, like in our case, we keep trying to get more money for education, but when health, security are top of mind, the money's not trickling in. How will you deal with that?
Okay, thank you, Maria. So this is obvious that the vast majority of people, they want the policies like they want decent jobs, they want strong social protection, they want quality social services, including education. But in many countries, once we come to the election, they support the government, which still persists with the policies that are totally different from the what we want. That's why, I strongly insist in my the first round, that we must make democracy work. So let's look at the structure of the public expenditure. See, so in the last 20 years in Asia, the military expenditure is going on. I mean, the keep going to increase. Why not the government will should be look at listen to the voices of the people that we need more money for social services, medical, education, and also the social protection. So let's look at the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic clearly demonstrates the flaws of the current social and economic system because they are trying to decrease the public spending, on this area. That's why the many people, like many people, who are just losing the job for only a month, make it impossible to pay for housing, education for children, and even food. So again, trade unions should stand up just to make democracy work. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's also, maybe in March, I wrote a piece for Time where I said, please let's not let the virus infect democracy. But it seems like it actually has, right? Rosalia, let's, your lessons from Fiji, of how to help teachers cope with these multiple problems. The trade unions going out in front to fight for it, but how do you help them cope? You're muted. Please unmute yourself. Great.
How do I?
There you go. Now we hear you.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay. Yeah. So this continuous dialogue within the university staff to ensure that, and I see this is so critical, as I said in my statement, that the unions must be at the forefront of social dialogue. And so here the unions with the senior management to be able to manage the situation so that it doesn't really get into that big mess that we are already facing the social impacts. And here we're talking about people losing jobs. So in Fiji, teachers are still employed, not yet with a pay cut. At the university, we still have our jobs intact because at the university, the union is in the forefront and continuously meeting with senior management to see how best we can retain workers and teachers to serve the students. So here, I said earlier in my statement that we hope that we will continue to maintain the social dialogue to curb the effect, the drastic impact of the COVID-19 on having to lay off staffs or reduce pay in total. But for the teachers out in the secondary schools in Fiji, I believe that the government can do better than what is now. And to do better, again, social dialogue is critical. They need to engage the people, the unions who are the representatives of the teachers. They need to start having that conversation. Keeping the teachers outside is not gonna help us curb the situation. So that's what I see the situation is and how we can ensure that we provide the best outcome during these trying times for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Shoya's clapping. So we have just a few minutes left. I want to just go through, starting with Simrin. We'll go to Shoya, Andrew, and end with you, Rosalia, which is, your final thoughts. I think it's a historic moment and, more power to teachers and trade union. But Simrin, you've given us a lot to think about. How do we move forward now? Your final thoughts.
Well, I think we have to embrace the fact that we're going to have to be agile and do things differently, or somewhat differently. But I think we should also at the same time capitalize on what we have built before the pandemic. And I think this is where this issue of solidarity is essential. And, seeing things from a more human lens, we need to, as our ILO Director General says, build back better. There should be a better normal, not the same normal, new normal, a better normal. So we need to build back better, and this has given us pause. We've seen things come up, but we've seen also great humanity and caring across the globe in terms of communities and trying to help each other as well. So I think we should capitalize on it and remember to be a bit agile, but also work on the foundations that were there, whether they were social dialogue, whether it was the kind of rule of law that was expected, whether it was fighting for education, whether it was allowing teachers to unionize or workers to unionize, and to keep up also just the support mechanisms, calling for the kind of financial side of things is so essential here in terms of building back better. That's been the biggest suffering in a way, and that leads to more exploitation. So I think really lobbying for putting the funding in the right places, which are especially on some of these social areas that are essential in building back better, education being one of the key ones. said
Fantastic.
more than one final word.
No. That's great. That's great. Thank you, Simrin. Let's go to Shoya. Shoya, I love the SDGs. I love your focus on the fundamental rights. So, your final thoughts.
Okay, so my final comment is that the trade union should be stronger, stronger to better protect their members and the workers as a whole. For teachers union, just to better protect teachers, and to be stronger to make voices of workers better heard by policymaker, lawmaker, and also by the society as a whole. To be stronger for unions, we need to organize more. So please, teacher, make sure you join your
Thank you.
union.
Thanks,
Thank
Shoya.
you very much.
Andrew, Hong Kong, your final thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I don't have many things to say, but I think professionalism is the key for us to prevent from interference, from political interference. And what we can see is that during the pandemic, not only in Hong Kong, but also for many countries, the teachers try to facilitate the teaching in other form, for example, e-learning or some other learning way. I think you can see that we have a lot of good teachers, and we need to stay together and defend our
Thank you.
professionalism.
Thanks,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
And Rosalia, you have the last words on this. Go.
Yeah, so I believe that social dialogue is critical more than ever before. Unions must be consulted in every decision making. And this is to empower one and all that education is critical, it's being tested. How we deliver quality education is at the heart of the matter now. So unions must be there in the forefront to defend education in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to this great panel, Simrin, Shoya, Andrew, and Rosalia. It was great to hear from you. I mean, pulling out some of the stuff, I think, truly education is key. This is Happy World Teachers Day, right? And I think that some of the things that you had pointed out, funding, dealing with the psychosocial tensions, I really like that because we need to deal with that, and the rule of law. Political power coming in and how education is going to have to deal with that, and the power of trade unions. It's a different world. We didn't really touch on how you're going to have to deal with your students who have been really tremendously affected by the technology. That's a game changer. I think there are different groups, there are different panels where you will tackle some of this. But thank you to the panelists, to the teachers who are watching, to EI. It's good to be back with you again. Again, Happy World Teachers Day. Before we go, I just want to play a video. This is the story of trade union rights and a recent win in Korea after 7 long years of struggle and the impact of solidarity. Here you go.
(20여 년 전) 교사들은 박봉에 시달리고 교장의 제왕적 군림 밑에 고통받았습니다. 학교는 비리투성이었고 교사들은 권력에서 독립되고 교장으로부터 자유로운 평교사들의 조직을 원했습니다.
제자의 해맑은 웃음을 위해 굳게 뭉쳐 싸워나가자. 교육민주화와 자유민주화 그리고 공일의 그날 정교조의 깃발 아래 함께 손잡고 나아가자. 민족교육 만세, 민주교육 만세, 인간화 교육 만세, 전국교직원 노동조합 만세.
1989년 전교조의 탄생은 독재와 권력의 편에 서지 않고 학생과 양심의 편에 서서 참교사로 거듭나겠다는 교사들의 다짐이자 열망이었습니다.
바로 국민이 주인이 된 국민의 정부임을 선언합니다.
그러나 정부는 5년간 1,500명의 선생님들을 학생들로부터 빼앗았습니다.
연행되어 갔어요. 유치장에 갇혀 있었는데 아버지가 면회를 오셨어요. 도교육청에서 그러는데 반성문을 쓰고 탈퇴서를 쓰면은 풀어준다고 하니 쓰는 게 어떻겠냐. 그때 그것을 쓸 수 없었어요. 우리가 하는 일이 옳다고 믿었기 때문이고요.
전교조는 세계 교육 역사상 가장 혹독한 시련을 이겨내고 합법화됐습니다. 해직교사 1,500명은 모두 민주화운동 관련자로 인정됐고, 전교조는 우리나라에서 민주화운동 기여자가 가장 많은 조직이 됐습니다.
어느새 살아온 날들이 이렇게 많다.
지난 9월 3일 한국의 대법원에서 전교조 법원의 조치가 위법하다고 판결했습니다. 그에 따라서 9월 4일 전국교직원 노동조합은 7년 만에 법적인 지위를 회복하고 다시 합법노조가 되었습니다. 지난 7년의 긴 과정에서 우리 세계 교육노동자들이 보여주신 지지와 연대, 그 힘으로 전교조 6만 조합원이 긴 투쟁을 이어올 수 있었습니다. 대단히 감사하다는 말씀을 드리고, 위원장으로서 이렇게 기쁜 소식을 세계 교육 노동자들께 전달할 수 있어서 정말 고맙고 감사합니다. 앞으로 전교조는 전 세계의 교육의 불평등 해소와 우리 한국 교육의 발전을 위해서 더 노력함으로써 오늘 이 기쁨에 보답하고자 합니다.